Hey everyone, and welcome to The Rational Republican, a podcast where we look at complex issues facing us here in Oregon and around the nation. We'll try to address issues from a nonpartisan perspective and view our disagreements through a lens of respect rather than tribalism or divisiveness. I'm James Ball. This is Nick Perlasky.
Hey listeners, how we doing?
Today's podcast is brought to you by ProLift Garage Doors. ProLift is your one-stop shop for residential and small commercial garage doors, from openers, springs, and rollers to full reinstalls. They offer same-day service on all garage door repairs with no extra charge for evenings or weekends. Serving the greater Portland metro area, call today and set up your free estimate at 503-558-6349 or at proliftdoors.com/Portland. Again, that's 503-558-6349 or proliftdoors.com/Portland. On this episode of the podcast, we are honored to welcome Representative Ron Noble. Representative, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. So we're down here in McMinnville in your office. Beautiful drive out this evening. And so why don't you just take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, tell you about your district, how you got into politics.
Well, I'm not sure just a couple minutes to discuss my district would do it, but I graduated from Dallas High School, so I've been in the Willamette Valley for about 50 years. Absolutely love it. Grew up in Polk County. Now we work in Yamhill County, but I've lived in Salem and up into Beaverton, and just really love Oregon. I fast forward after high school and college, I was a Corvallis police officer for 18 years, and worked a whole host of different assignments, and then got up into management and made the switch to McMinnville to be their police chief for 8 years. When I retired, I went to Linfield College and kind of transformed their security from a control the student, at least the intent was from control the student to providing a safe environment for education. Mm-hmm. And it may sound semantics, but really sometimes it is on how you approach your job. Was asked to run for House District 24 back in 2016, and so I'm on my third term. Absolutely love serving in the legislature.
So I got to ask, serving as chief of police, I'm sure there's a different amount of internal politics and working with local elected officials in a number of various capacities. Had you been particularly politically active, or were there issues or a single issue that you were really focused on, and you said, great, I have this opportunity to get to the legislature and really make a difference?
I don't know this. Well, no single opopportunity. Law enforcement is political. If you haven't seen the headlines, it is today. But I can tell you that even working the street 30 years ago, it's still political. And definitely police chief is political.
Sure.
And in that not everybody likes what you do. Mm-hmm. And one person may like you one day and maybe not the next, just based on the circumstances, which sounds like politics.
The whole nature of the job is confrontational and conflict resolution. And when you're confronting people, a lot of the times you're going to have people. I've seen leftists online talk about how there's no songs about F the fire department. It's like, well, yeah, because the nature of the job is completely different. There's nobody who's pro fire on the fire department.
No, but here's the connection I found in being in the legislature. It's like being a good street cop. It's identifying a problem and then trying your best to understand how somebody else views the problem. Doesn't mean you have to agree, but if you can understand how somebody else views a problem, you get a connection. And it gives you the best chance to at least have a dialogue then to better understand, because nobody sees the problem 360 degrees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I come at it with my view, you would come at it with your view, but if we can talk about it, then maybe we can resolve it.
So it's interesting, honest, and this is segueing a little bit away from your legislative career and your here in your district. But for us in Portland, we've gone through a year of some pretty serious protests, garnered a lot of national media attention, and the mayor and city council have taken a number of votes to defund the police, to reduce the funding available. You've seen stories of officers taking early retirement, some people job vacancies, being open and not being filled. And we just passed the record for a number of homicides in the city of Portland, and this was late October.
And
and we still have 2 more months to go, unfortunately. now there's a movement. Ted Wheeler says he wants to have the budget to increase and hire more officers, and even city councilors. I think Dan Ryan and Mingus Mapps have said they want to increase and have more officers. So it seems like the pendulum is swinging the other direction. Have you had any strong opinion on, you know, either the defund the police movement to start, or now kind of the movement to say maybe, you know, let's get great training, let's make sure that our officers are doing what's able to understand somebody's situation, even if they're not necessarily in agreement with it, but you still need actual officers out there enforcing the law.
I absolutely have strong opinions. And you know, the discussion that I mentioned earlier, the ability to discuss and collaborate and understand, was my role as vice chair of the House Judiciary Committee.
Okay.
Because we dealt with police issues and criminal justice issues, and working with Chair Bynum. Who would have thought that a African-American woman and a old white retired cop could actually come together and work together to get some progress? And I remember working before all of these extra things were tossed onto the police. Now, I started in the late 80s, and we were putting people with mental health issues in institutions. Mm-hmm. Absolutely the wrong thing. And it was the right thing to do to close the institutions. But we provided no supports on the street. So
There's no
police
alternative.
officers
Yeah.
became the mental health workers on the street.
Yeah.
There were no increases in any county mental health departments. There were no supports at all. So you fast forward a whole nother generation, and we have behavioral health issues on the street, and somehow we're going to take money away from police officers. By the way, we never gave them extra money to deal with that problem to
Do
begin
a
with.
whole second job.
I worked in 2 communities that I would twist the words, that I would say that we were one of the most efficient police departments around, because if you look at the officers per capita, both Corvallis and McMinnville, for the size cities, we were on the lower end. So we're efficient, as opposed to shorthanded.
Sure.
Because our goal is to really to make the community safe. So as we're going into this defund the police, I have no issue whatsoever in putting more funding and more resources into mental health issues, addiction recovery issues, domestic violence issues, so we can actually prevent them from becoming police issues to begin with. But when you take the money from the police department, who never got the money to begin with to deal with the issues, you have what's happening in Portland. And now you're looking for ways to stop real crime, shootings, robberies, burglaries, people getting hurt because you don't have the resource. And there were plenty of opportunities to improve policing, and we took those on. Not punish policing, but actually give them the ability to do their job, improve the standard, hire men and women with the highest character, and then ensure that they stay well, that they make it through any vicarious trauma issues or real trauma that they experience. And then it's not shameful to actually no longer be qualified to be a police officer. No different than the military. You could be the point man, and then at some point, you shouldn't be point anymore.
Yeah.
And there's really not much of a difference. I think there's a difference between combat and policing. Don't get me wrong.
There should be, yeah.
Sure.
There absolutely is. I've never been in combat, but I've been in some pretty serious, tricky situations in policing. 2 different environments, but the trauma that a person goes through is similar.
Yeah.
And that after a while, maybe there's a better fit in a different line and our system doesn't allow for that right now. And hopefully some of the changes we've made allow for that to happen.
Smoother transition.
I think that was one of the concerns of the defund the police movement. And so, I mean, again, trying to see it from their perspective and digging behind the headlines, because, yeah, defund the police is a stupid idea. But when you dig into the headlines, they're talking about, like, the militarization of the police. And I think a lot of that is, like, surplus gear from the military. And, you know, as someone who served in the military, seeing the when police become the military, you know, the citizens become the enemy.
Absolutely. It's not brand new,
Right.
But the idea of a guardian as opposed to military makes sense.
Right.
My view is that the military is what gave us the Constitution, it protects the Constitution. The police help to implement the Constitution.
Yeah.
And it's the other side of the fence. And that's important to protect people's rights, constitutional rights, laws. The military provides that Constitution for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're here in your wonderful district. We're here in McMinnville. What are the issues that McMinnvillians?
It's the same as Oregon.
Okay,
It's
like,
the
I've never known the denominator. I guess I'm
people
just
from
realizing this.
McMinnville, you know, the whole area.
The good folks of right.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that are top of mind? What are some of the things were in your office? And the YouTube viewers can't see, but we've got this whiteboard right here that's got all the bills you've been working on that you mentioned before we started recording.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of which have been citizen influenced and citizen written and everything. What are some of the issues that you see here in an area, in a county, in a district that's, you have some urban, you have some rural, you have ag issues, you have road issues, you have water issues. What are the things that are kind of top of mind for you and your constituents?
It's really a microcosm of the state.
Okay.
We have behavioral health issues. We have youth suicide issues. There's a bunch of bills there, but if you pick, we've got a youth suicide support for youth.
Okay.
We've got domestic violence and human trafficking issues, and there's a bill up on that board that a person who had been trafficked came to me and had some ideas on how the system failed her.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to provide some strength. Transportation issues. If you didn't have transportation problems getting to McMinnville tonight, then I think you're pretty fortunate.
You're right.
I was complaining about 26 the whole way down here, how
Yeah.
none of the lights are timed, or not 26,
99.
99.
Oh, yeah.
None of the lights are timed. You hit every single light on the way in here.
Yes.
I'm like, I feel like a small computer could fix this problem and make that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, but then we have manufacturing, we have rural and agriculture. I mean, you're sitting right in the heart of wine country.
Oh yeah.
Not just wine though. We've got hazelnuts, we've got cattle, we've got all kinds of crops in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Then you take a look at housing issues. You know, McMinnville, Newburgh, the area here have issues with housing. And then most recently, I went on a tour with all of our small cities in the county. We have water issues. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't think normally that the Willamette Valley has water issues, but we do. And part of it is infrastructure. And we have small towns that infrastructure is 100, 200 years, well, not 200, but 100, 150 years old. Mm-hmm. And it needs to be replaced. It's really not much different than, you know, the rest of Washington County that I don't serve, or down into Polk County or even Marion County. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people that are politically on both ends of the spectrum that I think are just looking for some hope. Right now, there's a lot of I'm a moderate in the legislature. Sometimes it feels pretty lonely. And I say that in jest because that means my friends are on both sides of the aisle. Yeah. And I'd like to think no matter where I landed on the political spectrum, that would be the case. But the issues are the same. We spent a lot of time, as I mentioned earlier, on judiciary issues. But I also serve on healthcare and human services and transportation and the wonderful conduct committee this year, which dealt with some conduct issues in the House of Representatives.
There was plenty of issues to deal with. Yeah.
I have an idea what you're alluding to there.
That will happen.
So who would you think, I don't know if you care to name names of your friends across the aisle, you know, moderate Democrats who, you know, might be not Republican, but
so here's the deal. You know, I co-sponsor bills with Bill Post, mm-hmm. and I've co-sponsored bills with Rob Noss. So I don't know that, and then, you know, Brian Clem and Paul Evans, but then also trying to think of Raquel Moore Green, and mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know that I would pick. It's not limited to just what we would necessarily quantify as moderate Democrats. You pick a topic, and there's someone there that we're going to meet.
Sure.
You know, Bill Post's bill on pseudoephedrine and mm-hmm. being able to get it over the counter like everyone else, and actually allowing us to track it on federal registries that Oregon hasn't been, was an important one. And then in 2018, I joined Rob Noss on pharmaceutical transparency bill. Okay. Now, Rob and I know he would like to start pharmaceutical pricing. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't go that far.
I'm not
but we can absolutely agree on transparency and try to reduce the cost and increase access. And that's the same with healthcare in general, where we will always agree to a point. And then then we have different ideas on how to solve the remaining problem.
Well, and, that's the old adage: is my 80% friend is not my 20% enemy, and especially working across the aisle, and maybe my 10% friend is not my 90%. But still, it's like if you've got issues and you've got work that can be done on which there is agreement, like, hey, let's take care of this and then argue about the rest of the stuff later. And we've had actually Bill Post, Nevada's newest resident, Bill Post,
right,
on the show before. And he was kind enough to tell us some stories after we had done recording. He said, like, this Democrat, I really like this person. I really like this person. Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful to hear, especially from somebody who is farther to the right. He's, farther out on the spectrum than I think either James or I are. But he still had these really great relationships and had some similar stories of, if there is an issue, that I'm able to go find and work somebody with. And even if there's not, he said, even if I don't like your politics, I can still be your friend. We can still talk and build a relationship.
And that's what's missing sometimes. I think people don't realize that happens more in the Capitol probably than people realize.
Okay.
I mean, the politics are more, sometimes they're more in your face outside the Capitol than they are inside. We all know where we stand. I mean, everybody knows that. Well, talk to Ron because he'll probably support this. Don't bother talking to him because of this. And I've had senators working across the other side of the Capitol come to me with, I think I've got a bill you like, and I've got some other ones that you're not going to like. And that's
cool.
And
Let me read them.
That happens
with
with Tina Kotek. It happens with, and then it also happens sometimes with some of my colleagues in my caucus.
Mm-hmm. I'm convinced that one of the reasons we have such a divisive and crazy atmosphere nationwide now is because people don't talk face to face. When you have a conversation with someone you disagree with and you're looking them in the eyes, it's much harder to start throwing insults and get tribalistic and I think that's one of the benefits of. I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that because I can see it happening where, when you're having a conversation with Tina Kotek about something you disagree with, that you don't go to insults. You talk about the issues because the human being is sitting right in front of you, and we miss that a lot with social media and 24-hour news cycle and
the comment section,
and the comment section and YouTube videos
and people pick up on the headlines, mm-hmm. and those are always going to be the areas where we disagree.
Right.
I can point to the special session we had where it blew up in the disagreement, but for the most part, we all know where we stand. What's missing sometimes outside of the Capitol is people label you and put you in a group, mm-hmm. and then they're not willing to talk to you at all about things that you actually can work well together on. And then the other side will consider you a traitor.
Yeah.
Because if you don't think like me, then you're not good. So there's a lot of things that I wish we could change, and I'm hopeful that we can change over the long run and get back to agree to disagree, and the majority wins. And if you don't like it, that's just kind of the way we were founded.
This is the idea the whole time. We're gonna have everybody together, air our ideas out, put it out there, and unless you're Bernie Sanders and you think you have 48 senators, so that counts as a majority.
Well,
and for everybody else, it's like if you actually have a majority, then that's going to be the idea that wins.
Well, and if we all thought the same, we could go with an emperor and be done with the rest of it.
Right?
Just make a king and we're done. But we don't.
Yeah.
And the government allows us to even, people have a right to say things that I think are foolish, and mm-hmm. people have a right to come with ideas that actually might change my mind and show me as foolish.
The idea of saying foolish things is exactly how we started this podcast, and we thank God for that right, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to say anything.
Well, it's the First Amendment only matters when you're offended. That sort of thing.
Exactly.
Like if we all agreed and we were all nice to each other and we were all politically correct, we don't need the First Amendment.
Well, you hit that, because we would not need a law against murder if nobody murdered.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Only when it happens.
Yep. So appreciate that.
Yeah, that's always the way it goes. So we still here, and one of the contentious issues that you had discussed was the redrawing of the maps. Everybody's seat has changed, everybody's alliance mm-hmm. have changed, and anybody running in 2022 is now, you're going to lose some of the constituents that you had represented. You're going to gain some new constituents that you'd represented, and we've. Obviously, the big news in Oregon is we've now got a 6th congressional district. We've gone from 5 to 6, first
mm-hmm.
time in 40 years. And the new CD6 is going to be here in your neck of the woods.
Right.
One of the things that we have, we've discussed, it's by the time this episode airs, it's going to be public knowledge, is that you are planning to run for that 6th congressional district.
I am.
What is it about serving Oregon at a federal level rather than a state level, and specifically getting the chance to continue to serve here the people of your district, the people that you've represented for the last half decade or so at the federal level? What draws you to that?
It's really an opportunity to take, I believe, what I've grown over the last the 3 terms that I'm in the state legislature, and which is, I just got to put this, it draws on everything I've done my whole life.
Sure.
From law enforcement to raising a family and my grandkids, but also the time in the legislature I hope I have the reputation of someone who's thoughtful, who's willing to listen, who stands his ground when he needs to, and I represent my district. And District 24 in the House is, right now as it stands today, is 50-50. Sometimes it swings, 1 point Democrat, sometimes goes back 1 point Republican. But it's really 50-50, and most voters are not registered. They're
Non-affiliated.
unaffiliated.
Right.
They are registered, otherwise they wouldn't be voters.
They wouldn't be
but they're unaffiliated. So it's really, my job is to represent the district. And I see that opportunity now in Congress to represent the district, the place where I've spent the last 50 years of my life, going to school, law enforcement, working in other areas. My wife grew up in the Beaverton area, so this is home, and I think I have that ability, the reputation. I'd like to take what I have grown in Oregon to DC.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I can remember. Well, I can't remember, honestly. It's been been a long time, and I've only been here for 6 years. But the influence that Oregon used to have at the federal level was titanically outsized. When Bob Packwood was in the Senate, Gordon Smith was in the Senate, Tom McCall was in the Senate, even the years that Greg Walden had, I think, while obviously a minority on the right, it was 4 Democrats and him, but the outsized level of influence, Greg Walden could have been Speaker of the House if he wanted to be. I mean, it's a massive amount of footprint for somebody, a state that's, about as far away from DC as you can get, and about as unlike DC as you can get in terms of, culture and politics and everything. But I know we've met Congressman Bentz, and I'm sure you've met or spoken with him as well. And it would truly be wonderful to have, at least 2 Republicans. We'll see how the rest of the races shake out and everything. But to try to get Oregon back to that place where you do have the ability to control the narrative and shape some conversations and really be able to get good bills passed. I guess I'd be curious for your thoughts on how much work have you done with Senator Bentz Congressman Bentz when he was a state senator, when he was in the House.
Well, that's what's that my first term in the House. Cliff Bentz served in the House.
Perfect. Okay.
And, his specialty then was transportation, which is near and dear to my heart.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
After he left and a few others, that's one of my other assignments is co-vice chair of the Joint Transportation Committee, which really is overseeing the implementation of the bill we passed, transportation bill we passed in 2017.
Okay. Which
Cliff Bentz had a lot to do with. So yes, we worked together. I've been on the phone with him because I don't, I guess you could call it maybe part of my cop sense. I don't just jump in without some sense of what I'm jumping into. I got to do some recon. So I've talked to him and some others about, what is it like from campaigns? What is it like relationship-wise? And what does life look like? I've got a wife. I've got children. I've got one still at home, and then grandkids. And I'm not willing to sacrifice my family. We're willing to make changes, but the family's all part of it. So a lot of conversation, a lot of soul searching, and then making sure that I have the skills that I can take with me to actually have an impact for Oregon.
Wonderful.
Do you have any issues or projects that you think would be really interesting to work on at the federal level that you weren't able to, that maybe they aren't relevant or, not really jurisdiction at the state level?
Well, if you take a look at the issues in our society right now, state or federal level, and it's still, policing is an issue at the federal level. Mm-hmm. The House passed a bill. The Senate's been sitting on it. The bill has some good things in it. I'm kind of glad the Senate hasn't passed it yet because there's some things that I'd love to have some input on.
I hear they're busy with some other legislation right now.
They are. They are.
Okay.
You know, there's and then take a look at healthcare. You know, healthcare is probably the greatest example of government controlled, either regulated or actually, controlled through both Medicare and Medicaid, and then regulation. And so, having a chance to be a fellow through the National Conference of State Legislators in Healthcare to learn more about what it looks like nationwide. My time in human services, we talked addiction, we talked child abuse, domestic violence, service for seniors. That's what I've been doing for the last 5 years, and that is what our issues are nationwide. Education,
Yeah.
you know, so really, as talked about whether or not I have the skills, those are the issues we're dealing with as a nation.
Well, it's funny that you specifically touch on education. So I was a low-level grunt staffer for Newt Bueller in his race in 2018, and that was one of the things that he harped on a lot was the fact that Oregon ranks so low in high school graduation rates, and well behind. To say nothing of the fact that there are many, many instances of mental health issues, crisis issues, teens dying by suicide, a number of different things that are obviously super hampering factors to actually having a better education system. We were just listening on the way down. The gubernatorial election is tomorrow in Virginia as we sit and record this. And that's one of the things that the Republican nominee, Glenn Youngkin, has been harping on is over and over and over is education, especially after the year of coronavirus where kids are at school wearing masks and education looks different. We just had a year of Zoom classes where any white paper will be able to tell you that is a hindrance in furthering a child's education. It's even more of a hindrance if you are lower income, minority, single parent, any of a number of things where we're hurting the most the individuals who are least able to be hurt. And it's something that Republicans never talk about. It's something that people on our side we always just see the issue.
The left has always kind of owned education.
Yeah.
And I think I think you're absolutely right. It's very interesting that it's now kind of switching back to kind of a Republican issue.
But you're right, Republicans aren't going to be able to provide the answer. It's going to have to be something together.
Absolutely.
Because we're just not equipped in our minds to have the whole answer. You mentioned graduation rates. Having worked in an institution of higher education, I couldn't get a direct answer, but I have a strong sense that graduation really means less than where you graduated from. So if you get a diploma from high school X versus a diploma from high school, Z, one college administrator will say, okay, X, so here's the remedial classes you'll need. Z, here are the honors classes you'll need.
Yeah.
So I think we're the grading system of high school graduation. I think it's flawed to begin with. And then we put a lot of money into schools. I mean, we may be last in graduation rate, but we're not last in funding. And so there is a way we can fix this. I don't have all the answers. I think I have something to add to the conversation.
And wasn't it Kate Brown was trying to boost the numbers by reducing the requirements to graduate, right? Wasn't that a thing that came out recently? Like you no longer have to pass reading and math tests.
It was the irony, truly, and I don't like that we actually. I don't like removing those requirements, but when they were actually put into place, again they were switched. Republicans said, "Why are you doing this? The SIM and the CAM, and just teach our kids and get them through. Don't teach to the test." So this takes and removes the test that we were teaching to. So we're still. The system is still broken. The system is still broken, and we need to come together to fix it and not make it. It became a political, me versus you, Republican versus Democrat. It didn't matter what one side was doing; the other side was going to not like it, and that's the part that in D.C. that I'm hoping that I can have an impact on.
Well, and it really and it's funny because you'd kind of mentioned a little bit about the capital culture, and we had an episode just this past Monday with one of your actual primary opponents for CD6, And one of the stories I mentioned was that I worked on Capitol Hill, and it's it's not at all unheard of. Everybody's got friends across the aisle, and I was in kickball leagues with Democrat staffers and Republican staffers. We'd go to, the cheap bars. You can get a $2 beer with Democrat staffers and Republican staffers. The main partisanship issue was House people versus Senate people. House people thought the Senate people would walk around like they didn't stink any at all. And the Senate people would look at the House people like these peons. All you can do is work for a congressman. So like that was a far more partisan issue than Republicans versus Democrats. But you really do end up in a behind closed doors kind of setting, having the ability to really have good, meaningful, fun, engaging conversations. But when, something comes on CNN or something comes on Fox News, all the Republicans go to one side and all the Democrats go to one side. And it makes it infinitely harder to actually get good work done, because in this particular case, like you just said, Democrats or the Republicans were the ones who were against standardized tests in the first place, and now we're against the removing of the standardized test. And Republicans will always say, like, we want better education. We want to make sure that our system works and is serving our students, and we get them through and get them where they need to be. But you flip-flopped on the issue, and it's which one is it? Either standardized tests help or standardized tests don't help, but you need to be consistent.
And
one
both
way
parties
or the two.
do. Both
And,
parties do.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
That's part of the nature of the game, and I'm okay if you're actually learning and growing, and you have found a better way and decide, let's change, let's move forward. But it's almost a game.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And believing that somehow an NBA player from one team and an NBA player from the other team, and I won't get into naming players, who just battle it out on the court and may even push and shove and may then go out to dinner together the next day because they're friends. And that's, people miss that part. It's like, I'm a duck, I'm a beaver. I had to bring that up from earlier. But you're still both sitting here.
To be fair, Nick is not really a beaver.
I married up. I went to the University of Texas, but I married up, so I get to. Anytime there's a good Civil War game or anything like that, I'm just as enamored with it.
So in my office at the Capitol, which I can't get to because of the construction, I've got a beaver helmet.
Yes, all right.
To remind me of the NCAA record for consecutive losing seasons.
I knew I was walking into something there.
Okay, but I did, when I was in Corvallis, I worked with the athletic department, and I remember when Jonathan Smith was playing, not just coaching.
Okay. Yeah.
But I also have a Linfield helmet, which signifies 65 straight winning seasons.
Yes,
which
they just
is a
set the
record
record,
at all levels.
Oh, yeah.
So, we can get together.
There you go. So that's like Republicans and Democrats in Oregon. We have one team that loses a lot and one team that wins a lot.
I know we talked about it earlier in the podcast, but I was just wondering if you could elaborate maybe a little bit more. Again, Portland metro area, the police have been really front and center over the last year and a half, 2 years, and like I said, I think that some on the left do have some interest, some points, some valid criticisms, but I feel like you either have to be the narrative is you're either 100% Antifa supporter or you kind of support police being able to do whatever they want to whomever they want, whenever they want. And so I wonder if you had any kind of, I know you have strong feelings, but any kind of like practical solutions or ideas that maybe can rein in some of that perceived abuse by police while you're still supporting the police department. And
well, not all of it's perceived.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
I've worked with some officers who shouldn't have been working, and I've watched officers do the right thing and still get crucified. There are people in our society. You would think after a couple hundred years we could get it right, but we haven't yet. They've been marginalized. They're kicked to the side, and it's for things that they don't control, and it's not right. And then there are police officers who are the most visible part of government. The thing that really bugs me is that people in my position somehow have separated themselves from police departments and police officers. But you know who the authority comes from? It's the legislature. Yeah. We make the laws. We even make the law that creates the police officer. And then we tell them what their qualifications are and go forth. And then we rake them over the coals for using that discretion. I've heard legislators say, well, they only stopped him for a tail light out or a license plate light out. Well, you made the law, so if you don't think that's right, get rid of the law.
Yeah.
It's that for me, it's kind of black and white. But there's this struggle right now. I will tell you that the correct response to Black Lives Matter should have been, yes, they do. Let's sit down and figure out what's going on, and let's solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Not, I matter too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah.
Everybody jumped on board with the Blue Lives Matter, and now that's a Democrat talking point. It's like, well, that's a uniform that you can take. I never understood why it was so hard for Republicans to say yes, Black Lives Matter. That's it. That's the end of the conversation.
But see, it's that creates then the larger conversation.
Yeah.
People need their constitutional right to redress the government, to protest, protect it.
Mm-hmm.
And law enforcement needs to be able to protect those people from people who infiltrate and actually hurt other protesters or hurt and just vandalize. There are people out there that do nothing but agitate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where law enforcement needs to act. Now, you can't, it's not the military, and it's not right for the military to think of it as just collateral damage. Well, we got the bad guys, and a couple of good guys got hurt too.
Mm-hmm.
That's not acceptable. So there are some things that need to happen. And I can tell you, I mentioned Janelle Bynum, the chair of the Judiciary. I know that just as I get feedback that says I went too far with supporting police reform, she has all kinds of feedback saying you didn't go far enough with police reform. So we kind of figure maybe we hit the right spot.
Right, yeah.
You know, there's some laws that we'll probably, there's one that we'll address in the short session, not because I think we got it wrong, but because we need to make it absolutely clear that the intent is that Portland doesn't not do anything,
Mm-hmm.
that law doesn't say that, that's not the intent. So we'll clarify it to make sure it's right. But the police officer is at a spot now to where if he or she acts, she's called on the carpet.
Yeah.
And if he or she doesn't act, they're called on the carpet.
Yeah.
So where's the greater risk to their livelihood, their home, their family, and maybe prosecution? By acting or not acting?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we're putting on our officers on the street. It's a lack, and I don't know personally. It appears to be a lack of leadership at the top. I have the utmost confidence they'll get it. I need to have that confidence that they'll get it right, that the chief and the Portland City Commission will come together. I have my own thoughts on the governance structure of Portland, but that's a whole other topic. But
Be a much
you know,
longer
I need to be
podcast.
optimistic that those conversations will still come together, that Portland will heal. A little over a year ago, I don't remember even who the interview was with. It may have been OPB, talking about, I think we were in 100 days of riot.
Sure. Yep.
And the interview I was talking about was someone asked this person, I don't remember where he was a professor who studies criminology, and just what can we expect in Portland after 100 days of riot? He says, no one's ever done that before.
Yeah.
Detroit didn't riot for 100 days.
Yeah.
And look what happened to Detroit. Cleveland didn't riot for 100 days. And Detroit, you could still say, has not recovered still. That would be absolutely tragic for Portland not to recover.
Mm-hmm.
But we're seeing fewer conferences at the convention center.
Yep.
We're seeing people not coming to Oregon wine country because they don't know what's going on, because tourism is not just static. They come into Portland, maybe a convention, and they travel to wine country. Then maybe they go out to the coast.
Mm-hmm.
They've hit 3 different tourism areas just because of one trip. So we need Portland to heal. Rural Oregon needs Portland to heal.
So, well, certainly, and obviously, and I keep looking at the camera, but right behind the camera is a map of what your district is, and your district is, in some large part, is going to be based on tourism. There's going to be a lot of tourism that comes through wine country, a lot of restaurants, everything like that. You know, hotel stays, Airbnb stays, everything. And to your point, now it's not a matter of, you know, riots or not riots in Portland, and, you know, well, it's just a Portland thing. They'll figure it out, because the cascading effect on so many small local businesses, obviously many of whom, if not all of them, are your constituents. It's one of those things where it's like, hey, like, you guys need to be getting this right, because we need to. A good chunk of revenue comes from people coming in for conferences, people coming in because they watch Portlandia and they want to check it out, and go through. I don't know, whatever.
That's very possible.
But it all cascades down And it's, this is,
I think they're
Yeah.
starting to realize it, and I've seen some articles about Ted Wheeler's. I mean, again, refunding
Right.
the police.
Right.
They're talking about making city camping illegal. They're going to start, cleaning up the camps. I think most recently there's a $40 million overage in business taxes from Multnomah County that they're gonna put toward homelessness, and so whether or not they are able to do it with their governance structure, as you put it, is to be determined. But I think that even the Ted Wheelers of the world are starting to realize that this is a problem that needs to get fixed, and they can't just keep sweeping it under the rug. So
Right. And the key will be how they fix it.
yeah,
Because it would be tragic to actually just cover it up and fix it and move on and have the same thing flare up in a couple of years.
yeah,
Because there are, like I said, there are truly people that have been marginalized. If we don't come up with some way to increase the housing supply, we will always have a housing problem. And it's not going to be, even if we started building today, it's going to be 5 years before we get another 200,000 homes in the state.
mm-hmm.
Because it's going to take that long.
It takes that long
find
to build them.
land to build.
yeah.
yeah.
You're sitting in McMinnville. We have all class one farmland around us. We're about done until we start building high rises, and
Yeah.
that's not going to happen here. So there's other cities like that there's just no buildable land. We have to figure out something, protect our farmland, build homes. That way, people can have homes, and you're not paying an exorbitant amount for housing.
Well, we can ask Mr. Future Metro Counselor here about the
you
urban
go.
growth boundary and any thoughts he's got on that. But that's
Yeah,
obviously
I think
it's an extremely hampering factor for the city of Portland. And to your point, it's one of those things where everyone recognizes housing costs way too much. Costs have gone up astronomically. When I moved here in 2015, they still build Portland as the last affordable city on the West Coast. When was the last time you heard somebody talk about Portland as being affordable? Like it's just
No.
it's not anymore.
No.
Just period, full stop.
There's a balance, and I think that's where legislators and public officials come into play, especially again urban growth boundary, because that's where we live. But you don't want Portland to turn into Houston, where there's just no limits and you just drive
Absolutely
for
not.
hours in all directions. But at the same time, when you have this artificial constraint of weird zoning rules that prevent you from building out and you have to build up, you end up with housing crisis and insane housing prices.
The other part of that is we need to strengthen the economy so people's wages go up.
Yeah.
Also very true.
There's two sides to that equation as far as I can't afford a house. Well, either the housing price needs to come down or the wages need to go up.
One of those levers.
And government's not good at balancing that out.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be private interest, private on both sides, as far as building the economy, which includes the housing, getting people into homes.
Yeah, start deregulate a little bit, and we've had this discussion too. Like, you can't just say deregulate and just chop all regulations. There are good regulations, and there
absolutely.
are hindrance regulations. But yeah, deregulate a little bit, because this is one of the problems in Portland is just the red tape to build anything is insane. The permitting, thousands of dollars in permitting for ADUs and just minor changes. I was. I own a garage door business, and was doing an estimate for this guy who had been working on his remodel for over 2 years, and he was waiting on permits. Like, he was still waiting on permits. He's like, yeah, the guy from the county is supposed to come in this week or maybe 3 weeks from now to inspect the final inspection, and then we can put the garage door in. So yeah, it's just crazy.
Get stuck in a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to say I like Portland to turn into Houston a little bit. Houston's got really good food, and they have 8-lane highways where people don't drive 55 in the left lane. So let's give Houston a little bit of credit here, because they got some good stuff going on.
Well, so what I was referring to, I know you're joking,
I know,
but
yeah.
the complete lack of zoning at all, and so people just build whatever, wherever, and
Right.
it just kind of spider webs out from.
Although I think Portland is going to be kind of a unique test case, because we do have the urban growth boundary, and everything is 5 or 6 miles away, not connected by a ton of highways. But now that everybody's post COVID, there's a ton of jobs that are just going to be permanently work from home. Who knows? Maybe you don't mind if you live in Wilsonville, because you're not going to commute into downtown anyway. It doesn't matter.
Let me tell you, the traffic still sucks during rush hour. So
Well, that's
Anyway.
something we'll have a whole nother podcast on. We'll have you just
There
on.
we
We'll talk
go.
about
We
transportation
talk about
issues.
transportation,
Let's
COVID,
do it.
broadband, and
let's do it.
But I do know we're coming up on the end of our time here. We always like to end our podcast by asking our guests who their favorite Republican is. So if you had to pick one, living or dead, Oregonian or national, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Okay, so this is going to be a personal story.
Hit me.
Because my favorite Republican, several in my family, but I'm going to pick my grandfather,
Okay.
who was a state's attorney in Southern Illinois during Prohibition.
No kid. Okay.
All kinds of stories of politics as I was growing up.
I can imagine, yeah.
One of his good friends was Everett Dirksen,
Really? Wow.
who's had a Senate building named after him.
Yes, he has, yeah.
I've got his admission to the Illinois bar signed by Adlai Stevenson.
Oh, my gosh.
And probably if there's somebody, and it's not just him. I mean, I've got family all over the country, but he probably piqued my interest in politics just growing up and hearing stories of the politics of small southern Illinois, and working with judges in counties and just and then with his friend who went off to D.C.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and everybody always, people love to point out Ronald Reagan or Abraham Lincoln or Tom McCall, and you point to these big
I could name
inspirational
those.
quotes.
I could name those.
I know nothing against any of them, believe me. And we've had a number of guests say all three of those people, actually. But you have these big, lofty inspiration, and there's the speeches, Gettysburg Address, or whatever. But at the end of the day, politics is a lot more Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec than it is, Ronald Reagan with "There You Go Again" to Jimmy Carter in the middle of a debate.
Right.
And if you've got a firsthand knowledge of what some of those insider stories are, and it's maybe it's less sexy than something that makes the newspaper, makes national attention on CNN or whatever. But it's the real deal, honest to God story of how things get done, and you got to see firsthand how people's lives got better. That's an absolutely incredible story right there.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Representative, once again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, giving us the time. And with that, we'll end it. Listeners, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to the Rational Republican podcast. Your hosts are James Ball and Nick Perlosky. The show today is brought to you by ProLift Garage Doors of Portland, serving the greater Portland metro area for all your garage door installation and repair needs. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can email us at james@jamesaball.com or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can find our episodes at jamesaball.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts.